This module is balloon releases in high winds. Sable Island is a very good place for high wind releases. There are no trees, power lines, or other obstacles that can get in the way. The ground is in pretty good shape, so not too uneven anywhere. There's lots of high wind, so good opportunity to practice. Technicians have successfully released in winds as high as 60 knots, but there's a large element of luck at that speed. But the more high wind releases you attempt, the better your luck will be. High wind releases are usually defined as occurring when the wind speed is greater than 25 knots. But there are situations where releasing in 25 knots is easy and other situations where it's difficult. Here are some of the difficulties introduced with high wind speeds. The balloon can be awkward to handle. The wind will blow the balloon into sometimes unpredictable directions and the balloon will become stretched. The erratic tugging can make it difficult to control, and if conditions aren't good, for example in snowdrifts, you can be pulled off balance. In some cases, the wind can be high enough that the balloon just rips apart and you're left holding the balloon neck. Once you do release the balloon, the erratic winds can cause the sawn to hit the ground, hit the side of the balloon shed, or even hit the technician. First, let's look at how wind is affected by flowing around a building. One technique for visualizing airflow is the use of streamlines. In this image, you can see an automobile with streamlines showing how the wind flows over the car when it's in motion. The streamlines indicate two parameters. The direction, in this case the direction is assumed to be front to back, and speed is indicated by the spacing of the streamlines. Narrow spacing means higher speeds. So in this image, we can see that the wind flow is diverted around and over the car's body. In front of the car, the streamlines are widely spaced, but as they flow over the hood and then the windshield, they get closer together, showing that the wind speed increases. The highest wind speeds appear to be just above the roofline, just behind the driver. In the same way, building designers use streamlines to show how the wind is affected by buildings. We're going to use an illustration to represent the balloon shed. This is a side view of the balloon shed, showing the cubicle building and the launching ramps on the two sides. This is an overhead view of the balloon shed. We've simplified the discussion by not including the electrolyzer room. First, let's look at the wind flow as it goes over the top of the balloon shed. The streamlines show the wind is flowing from left to right. On the left side of the building, there's a big eddy right in front of the door. The wind is forced to rise over the building and descends on the right-hand side. The eddy on the right side is complicated. The wind stream descends to the ground and some of the wind goes back to the left, then rises up the face of the building. The big eddy is almost 1.5 times the height of the building. The big eddy is also about 3 times longer than the building is tall. Sable's balloon shed is about 24 feet high, and that eddy extends about 75 feet to the right. Many technicians have made the mistake of releasing the balloon inside the eddy. Releasing early in the eddy can result in the balloon being pulled down and blowing back towards the building, and the sawn can hit the ground, the technician, or the building. In one case, the balloon was released near the end of the ramp, and the reversed wind flow blew the balloon back inside the building. In this situation, the technician is running to the right, but the balloon is stretched backwards by the turbulent eddy. At the far right side of the eddy, the wind is descending. Releasing near that end of the eddy, the balloon can do a couple of somersaults and be forced down, and the sawn can be smashed against the ground. It's also important to recognize that this streamline diagram is simplified. In real life, the flow is more complicated. That big eddy may have other eddies inside, and the flow is just a complicated mess of winds switching direction up, right, left, and down. It's never a good idea to release inside the eddy. You may have a successful launch, but it's entirely a matter of luck. Here's an overhead view showing the eddies from above. Again, the wind is blowing from left to right. Viewed from above, you can see the horizontal eddy is broken up into two sub-eddies. One rotates right and one rotates left. If you walk down the right-hand ramp and then go just a little distance to either side, you're in another confused flow with the wind blowing backwards or forwards. Look at the spacing of the streamlines. The narrow spacing shows that immediately beside the eddy and beside the building, the wind is accelerated. In a perfect situation, the technician could go well downwind of the building and get out of the turbulent flow. However, the more the balloon is stretched and tugged, the more likely it will be damaged and either burst on the ground, burst at release, or burst prematurely in flight, forcing another attempt. The most successful strategy is to minimize the distance you have to take the balloon and to get out of the eddy as soon as possible. Since we should never release downwind of the balloon shed, in the zone of the vertical eddy, let's just look at the overhead view. In this situation, potential release points are marked with an X. They're outside the turbulent eddy, and it's just outside the zone where the winds accelerate around the building. Before attempting the release, scout out the situation with a walkthrough. Walk down the ramp and turn left and walk away from the building. You'll be able to feel the turbulent wind on the ramp, and as you walk left, you'll be able to feel the accelerated wind, and then you'll be able to feel that you're through the turbulent zone and in a pretty steady flow. Note that point on the ground so you can get back there. There may be a tuft of grass or a bare patch or some other noticeable point on the ground. When you do finally start your release, walk down the ramp with the balloon ensawed. At the bottom of the ramp, turn and take a few running paces to get you as close to your chosen release point as you can. You'll have to control the balloon throughout this process with your hand held high above shoulder height to try and prevent the balloon from breaking against the ground. Going through the turbulent zone, the balloon is going to be experiencing a combination of those vertical and horizontal eddies. It's going to be pulled one way and another, and you just have to adjust your steps to manage its path. Once you get to the release point, you'll feel the turbulence let up and the balloon will feel like it wants to fly. Let the balloon and sonde go. Some people let the balloon and sonde go simultaneously with an upward sweep of both arms. That's my preference. Some people try to let the balloon go and then an instant later let the balloon pull the sonde out of their other hand. Sometimes the sonde falls out of the other hand and hits the ground. Other times the sonde gets yanked so hard that the string or the unwinder breaks. Some people try to let the balloon go and throw the sonde forward and up like a football quarterback. This seems to me like a risk of holding on a fraction of a second too long and bad news as a result. That's the basic technique. Now consider this next situation. Here, the wind is crossing the ramps at right angles. You can see from the streamlines that there's turbulence over the ramps. You can also see from the spacing of the streamlines that the wind is being accelerated right in the zone of the ramp itself. The technique is the same. Before release, scout out the situation. Walk down the ramp and see if you can feel where the wind acceleration begins and ends. Since the wind will be blowing you sideways, you should anticipate going along with the wind. So slightly downwind of the ramp and outside the turbulence zone, note that spot. So your preferred release point might be about there. At release, you want to get to somewhere near that spot. You'll find as you gain experience that you'll just take a quick walk out and note all the flow characteristics. And you'll also find that there are traditional release points that occur again and again. It's important though to take that walk before you try the release. A slight change in angle of the wind together with fluctuating wind speed could mean the turbulence is more or less than expected, and you might be surprised. On Sable Island, the balloon shed is oriented east-west as illustrated. And in our illustration, we've now attached the electrolyzer room. That addition will complicate the flow coming over and around that side of the building. By using the principles we've discussed, we can, in advance, figure out where the best release point is likely to be. When the winds are from the west, it's just like the example we looked at, and the best release point is around point A. Theoretically, point B could work as well, but the turbulence from the electrolyzer room may complicate the turbulence from the inflation room. You'll be able to make a determination when you take your pre-release walk, but most of the time we found that point A is the better choice. When the winds are from the north, it's like the example we worked through, just off the end of the ramp and on the downwind side. The winds may fluctuate one side of north or another, so either point A or point B will be better depending upon the vagaries of the wind. Again, you'll be able to make a determination when you take your pre-release walk. When the winds are from the east, it's just the opposite of the westerly winds, and the best release point is again around point A. The same comments apply to point B. Maybe it could work as well as point A, but the turbulence from the electrolyzer room will only complicate the turbulence from the inflation room. Again, you'll be able to make a determination when you take your pre-release walk, but most of the time we found that point A is the better choice. South winds are symmetrical with north winds. For intermediate directions, we can start to summarize the general release points. Northwesterly winds, again, point A. Northeasterly winds, southeasterly winds, and southwesterly winds. There are no hard and fast rules though. The vagaries of the wind direction, the magnitude of the fluctuations in speed, the slope of the ground, all of these will influence the wind flow around the balloon shed. Releasing the balloon is an art. It doesn't take a lot of strength or agility. It just takes paying attention to the wind flow before you do the release, and then doing your best to avoid the balloon hitting anything. Even in the highest winds, you're not going to be dragged to Newfoundland. The balloon is just too fragile to be a problem that way. If there's too much stress on the balloon, it just shreds and disappears. The only times people have fallen over have been trying to release in deep snow and they lost their balance. There are additional complications. When high winds blow from either the north or south, they are blowing directly across the doors. With the balloon hooked on the table, when you start raising the overhead door, you may find the wind entering the inflation room will bash the balloon against the inflation table. Once the overhead door is open, it can sometimes be difficult to get the balloon out the door. Really strong crosswinds can blow the balloon against the door jamb and break it, and before you know it, you're halfway down the ramp with only a balloon nozzle left in your hand. In these situations, it's reasonable to ask for a second person to open the door for you. Even if the winds aren't that strong, crosswinds combined with heavy rain, icy conditions, snowdrifts, etc. can make the release trickier than it would otherwise be. If there are any complications that will make the release tricky or difficult, call the OIC for another technician to assist. This is the end of balloon high wind releases.